Coming up on Theater Talk.
Well, the other night at the show, that I was sitting next to these gentlemen couple, and the geek, who is 6'8" and has an extraordinary mask.
He's a pinhead, right?
Right. He comes out in the curtain call holding his mask, and the guy next to me went, "Oh my God, he's gorgeous."
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
Now, Michael, I have been to Sideshow. It's wonderful, and we're going to talk about it tonight.
And I have a long enough memory that I was at the opening night of the original production of Sideshow on Broadway in 1997. There had been a lot of tremendously exciting buzz and previews about the show, and it got some nice reviews in New York, but it never caught on. However, the score, really one of the best scores of the last 25 years, by Henry Krieger and Bill Russell, who are with us tonight on Theater Talk. That score, guys, has sort of lodged in the minds, or rather on the CD players of many, many people over the years, and kept the phenomenon of Sideshow going for a long time.
It seems to have been a very good tool to keep it alive. Yeah. And thanks for the nice words about the score, our score.
But one person who has been a fan of the show, I think, a long time, probably since he saw it originally on Broadway, is the writer and director Bill Condon.
That's right.
Who has, with Henry and Bill, rethought the show. You opened it at the Kennedy Center this past summer to excellent reviews, and now it is here in New York.
Yes.
So it's a show that you believed in from the very beginning, Bill?
Absolutely. You know, I saw it as a fan first. Went back many times in New York, actually saw a great production in California, and then Henry and I had the great pleasure of working together on the Dreamgirls movie, which was not only taking the show and putting it on screen, but Henry wrote a lot of new songs. And with that, it just felt as though we didn't want to stop doing it, right?
Yeah, couldn't imagine not continuing with my collaborator and great friend here.
And also, you have a superbly designed production by a good old friend of ours, David Rockwell. We didn't mean to ignore you at the end of the table, David. David also has a new book out called What If? The Architecture and Design of David Rockwell. So, gentlemen, from the Sideshow gang, welcome to Theater Talk.
Didn't you and David meet at the Oscars?
That's right. David designed the Oscars that I produced in 2009.
We actually met at the Algonquin over
That's
a
right,
drink.
to talk about it, yes.
And Bill said, how would you like to work on the production design of the Oscars? And after several drinks,
He said yes.
we decided, you know, that it could use reinvention, and it was thrilling and amazing and terrifying and a fantastic experience. So I would do anything with Bill.
Okay, Bill and Henry, take me back to the initial impulse for Sideshow, which is about Violet and Daisy Hilton, Siamese twins of the 1920s, I believe, was their sort of era.
30s is probably closer.
30s,
yeah.
It's an odd subject matter, I must say, for a Broadway musical. Why did you guys hit on this?
Well, in 1985, Bobby Longbottom, who directed the original production, said to me that his friend Russell had seen this terrible movie called Chained for Life at 4 in the morning on television in Chicago, and it starred these real-life conjoined twins who sang and danced and played musical instruments, and he said, I think we should do a musical about them. And I immediately said, yes, that's a wonderful idea. I just thought the thought of two actors moving and singing together was so inherently theatrical. But we didn't really get to it for another 7 years. We were doing our show Pageant at the time. And then we had done a little research in that time and found out more about them. And then we started in 1992 with Henry.
Yeah, what brought you into it, Henry? Were you interested in this,
Well,
these women too?
Yes, well, not until Bill and Bobby had contacted me. They sent me a letter by fax through the Dramatists Guild saying
That's how long ago it is.
I know it was. And they said, we have a new project that we'd like to talk to you about. You're the only composer we want, which of course made me very happy to hear that. And I went over and met Bill and Bobby at Bobby's apartment, and their enthusiasm and their unusual take on what was theatrical because Bill says that's inherently theatrical, and it's come to pass that it is. But I didn't know that at first. I wasn't at all sure, but I did know I was interested by their dynamism, their enthusiasm, and their imagination.
Bill, what was your attraction to it when you first saw it? You said you saw it a number of times.
I saw it a number of times. The thing I first fell in love with was the score, honestly. It did feel like a major score, and you know, I think like a lot of Sideshow fans, I was disturbed by the fact that it didn't run as long as it should have. It always felt to me that this show, and especially the conceit of the two girls, it deserves its own spot in the canon, you know. And I think that's what we've all been trying to. It's putting on the show, but also making an argument for the show and for the score as something that should be with us for a long time. You know?
Did you see it originally in '99?
I did not see it originally.
Is that an advantage then when you are conceiving it from scratch?
Well, you know, there's many shows I had seen originally, and sort of they stay in your memory. In this case, what was intriguing was the score, the story, and Bill's concept, and the realization as we got into it that the world of the Sideshow, which is a very compelling, kind of amazing, detailed world, in some ways stays with these girls wherever they go. And so physically, that was a really interesting key, because it really took the emotion of the story and the music and moved it forward in a way that they never leave certain pieces of that, they build on it.
So Bill, when you wanted to get the show back,
Yeah.
have a place in the canon, what, beyond the design concept, would we say that you have a more realistic view of it?
I think that's true. I do think that that was, you know, we've joked about the fact that this should have been the first production, and then Bobby's brilliant production is the great abstract revival, you know. So,
Impressionistic.
yeah, exactly, you know, sort of that gets to the essence of something different. But yeah, I think, you know, the original instinct was to really make you feel that you're right there as you go into the theater, that you're surrounded by these freaks and attractions, you know. So for example, we have a design team, Dave and Lou Elsey, who have worked exclusively for movies. You know, Dave won an Oscar for The Wolfman, who've come in and created masks for some of the attractions that are really unlike anything that's been done in the theater, because they are completely photoreal. They could be sitting here right now and you would think that was a person. And yet they're, you know, they've devised them so that the actors can take them off, put them on
Yes,
again.
that's
you know.
remarkable how they
Yeah.
change, yeah.
Yeah.
Is this really the essence of the difference between the original production and this production today, that there's a grittier, more realistic,
Right.
almost scarier sensibility to it?
That's part of it, and I think collectively we focus more on their story. It's not quite as much a backstage story as the original was. We have introduced a flashback in Act 1 that goes into their childhood, which was fascinating. I've often said the hardest part of writing about them was knowing what to leave out, because they led such dramatic lives.
Yes, and it's interesting how closely you have actually followed the lives of the Hilton sisters. I mean,
Yes.
Did you do new songs for this?
We've written a lot. There's currently, I think, 9 that were not in the original production. But some of them, Bill looked at everything we had written over the years for the show, and we went back to some things we had written earlier that weren't in the original.
But Bill, when you walked in, then you're going in and you loved the show to the beginning,
Yes.
but then you said to yourself, but this has got to change. And what was it?
Because I came into it also as a fan of the movie Freaks and knowing something
Yeah.
about the Hilton sisters, and I think we know more about them maybe than when you first wrote
Absolutely.
Yeah.
it just felt like, my God, there are all these great dramatic events that we can put on stage. We discussed it as a movie before we discussed doing a revival, and you know, movies are a more realistic medium, you know, and it did feel as though there were so many possibilities for what we could do there. And out of those discussions, when we finally decided to do it on stage, came this whole kind of rethinking, where we did explore, as you say, you know, all these big ideas. You know, for example, the fact that they were basically owned by this character, Sir, you know, someone who hadn't appeared in the original production, and had to sue to gain their freedom. Or the fact that it was always considered a possibility that they could be separated. The link between them wasn't quite as complex as with other conjoined twins. So injecting some of those few big ideas, suddenly then you find the score has to change, right? Because suddenly it pushes you into completely different directions. You know?
Different ideas, different emotions, different stakes. I have to say one thing about the masks, about the prosthetic masks. Could you quickly tell that story about the elderly gay couple?
But the other night at the show, that I was sitting next to these gentleman couple, And the geek, who is 6'8" and has an extraordinary
He's a
mask,
pinhead, right, yeah.
he comes out in the curtain call holding his mask, and the guy next to me went, "Oh my God, he's gorgeous!"
Our actor is a gorgeous guy who's wearing
Matt
this
Davis.
crazy Matt Davis.
Matt Davis, right?
David, where do you begin the research for this? I mean, I know that you're a big believer in surrounding yourself with books and pictures. What was the inspiration for your set concept?
We started looking at sideshows, and in fact, one of the new pieces for New York is a show drop that shows the sideshow. But we also looked at German expressionism, and so realism really isn't the right word. Detailed is the right word, and in fact, some of the most emotional numbers, like "I Will Never Leave You," is done in a very big abstract void. Yes. So we looked at research from the period, but we also looked at expressionism. We looked at
Why expressionism? Why was that something that you thought could work in this concept?
Well, because it all sort of begins and ends with the movie Freaks. I don't think we'd be talking about them or making a musical about them if that movie hadn't been made. It was such a dominant style of Hollywood in the early 30s.
Your homage to the movie Freaks within the musical
yeah.
is a wonderful.
Did you go out to Coney Island at all? Did you look at some real sideshows?
I did.
They're still
There's a
around?
really strange sideshow that's still out there that we wanted to look
Really?
at.
Yeah.
Are the sideshows now really what we
on the show.
would call, freaks by nature? Are they now actors who are dressing up as?
I don't think that, well, they may be. I haven't been to the big, this one did have, people with missing limbs and things like that.
But there's no more pinheads, and there's
No,
no
that's
more.
true, there weren't, yeah.
But the takeaway from the audience is how they relate to being
Yes.
an outsider.
Well, exactly,
I
yeah.
think
Yeah.
it's really interesting that the audience comes out relating to the fact that in some way or another they understand that feeling of being an outsider.
Right.
And they're confined and they're exploited.
Yeah.
Well, what I was found fascinating about Sideshow is, it's a world of freaks, and yet when we get to know Daisy and Violet Hilton, we get to know them as human beings and not freaks. We look past what it is that's making them famous and why people want to see them into two people who are very different in some ways.
It's like when young people come out of high school having thought of themselves as completely isolated and perhaps freaks, when they actually grow into themselves and realize that they are humans and that they don't have to think of themselves like this all the time. And I think our girls did that too.
I was very sorry, though, to learn that they died impoverished, bagging groceries.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
were the
you have
highest-
their triumph, and then
Yeah.
They were the highest paid act in the history of vaudeville, but
Really?
of course they had no experience handling money at
yeah.
all. They'd never been to a store to buy something in their entire lives, so
Like George Bush the first.
That's right. Now, I've always heard the story, and I want to see if you can confirm this. Is it true that when you were a kid, I think you went to Columbia, right?
Yep.
Yeah. You somehow finagled a ticket to the opening night of Dreamgirls on Broadway, and that began your career or your love of this man. And
Well, certainly that, yeah.
Tell me that story.
He was steeped in theater before that.
Yeah, exactly. It was, and I don't think we finagled. It was my friend Ellen, who is ironically the niece of Paul Libben, who is number 2 at the Jujamson.
Which owns the St. James
Right,
where you're
but
running.
Ellen organized tickets for us. We were in the back row. I think they cost $8 or something. And as soon as that went on sale, she'd gotten the tickets, And yes, it was wild to be in that theater. That was truly, I mean,
It was a wacky night.
it was a wacky night. It was crazy, and that was the first time I'd ever seen a number stop the show. I mean,
Yeah.
that standing ovation for her before the act ended was just, and then we were right at the back, and we were all up on our feet.
Why do you say it was a wacky night, that opening night of Dreamgirls?
Well, had a lot of stars who were excited to be there. The buzz had been very hot.
yes.
And they were excited to see each other. And I remember Diane Cannon was in front of me and being very wild. And in the best possible way. And this was an unusual show, Dreamgirls, in that it really told the human story of African Americans. I mean, you had a lot of shows. I mean, I don't count Porgy and Bess because that's an opera.
Yeah.
But you had a lot of shows like Bubbling Brown Sugar and this thing and that one. Maybe Ain't Misbehavin' was more of a human story, but it was still.
The others tend to be
if.
light reviews, sort of.
That's right. But this was really a story of human beings trying to make it, and they're interrelating with one another and all that. and it was unusual, and we had worked for a long time to make it the best it could be. Michael Bennett and my late partner Tom Ian and all the actors who were with us from the beginning. So it was a cauldron. It was like bubbling and bubbling. And when Jennifer Holliday would sing, people would, you know.
To this
Well,
day,
we
you
have
can-
to, yes, to this
but
day.
to this day, you can see the great clip of her doing on, I'm telling you, on the Tony Awards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, still has the power to absolutely knock you out.
And I am telling you, I'm not going. Even though the rough times are showing, there's just no way, there's no way.
Somebody was telling me, now your theater was, yes, I remember Judy Jacksina, who was the press agent for 9 back then. And remember, Dreamgirls was at the Imperial, and 9 was at the...
Next door, 46th
46th.
Street. Yeah.
And there would come a point in 9 where there was a quiet song, and all of a sudden they would hear the thunder from next door because Jennifer Holliday had just finished, and I'm telling you, I'm not going.
Yeah, they didn't like that.
You get satisfaction. I wrote the most amazing number in the history of the musical theater. I mean, I pointed to somebody the other day. I said, and he wrote, I'm telling you, I'm not going.
Well, I try to think of my life and my career day to day, fluid,
Yeah.
moving along, and it's a very nice feeling to have written that song and to see it done on TV all the time. And one of the funny stories that I heard recently was that Jennifer Holliday was doing her own production, Theater Under the Stars, and they wanted her to rehearse in the sun. And she said, I can't do that. I won't. And because she is Effie.
Yeah.
And with all affection meant. And so they said, all right, well, we'll get somebody to stand in for you. She said, make sure it's a white girl. Because she was afraid if it was one of her own that...
She might do a better job. It's possible. But you know, I think I Will Never Leave You, though, is a great
It's
song
wonderful,
too.
and-
And I think that song, in many ways, is what often kept the idea of Sideshow around, because people were doing that song in lots of cabarets and all that kind of stuff. Can you give me a sense of how you actually wrote the little story behind that song, how you wrote I Will Never Leave You?
Well, that's interesting because the first draft of Sideshow, we had conceived that the twins would be little girls for the first third of the first act, 8-year-olds. And that was actually their first song. It was the first song we wrote for them. And it was meant to be a lullaby that they comforted each other when they were taken to these doctors who threatened to cut them apart. Well, then as we thought about it and went along, and the idea of 8-year-old conjoined twins, you'd have to have 2 sets of them, and then a set of understudies, and then a
Kid
child
wrangler.
wrangler.
That could
Right,
go way
you know,
wrong,
so
yeah.
it was
Budget.
right. So we gave up that idea, and I said, well, we've got to cut I Will Never Leave You. And David Chase, our musical director, said, you can't cut that song. So we moved it to their 11 o'clock number and wrote an intro leading into it where they're looking back on their childhood. But it never was completely satisfying to me because the lyric was intentionally so simple because they were little girls. Now we have restored the sequence in the first act of the flashback where they are taken to the doctors and they sing that in counterpoint as they're being examined. And I think it really sets up the song for later on. And also we have a new plot development in Act 2 that I think really helps earn that song.
So your original conception of it was the melody, which I think now is this, you know, one of these great muscular, soaring Henry Krieger anthems, was a lullaby?
It was. Bill had originally thought of it that way, and yeah, it was like this. And now it's like that.
Oh yeah, it's like this. But I mean, that's the wonderful thing about the show, because I think a lot of contemporary shows now, the scores, while you can admire them, people tend to write on sort of a more muted level. You know, I don't hear these gigantic things that I want in the musical theater that grab you by the lapels and force you out of your seat.
And this is full of them.
Yeah.
Full of them, and it's also, it's sort of, this is a show without irony, and it's so, I think in our culture, certainly in the theater, but everywhere, everything has always got that ironic twist. And this is truly the way that Bill and Henry write. It's true heart on their sleeves,
Yes.
heart on your sleeve. It's just full out emotionalism. And I think it's very satisfying for that reason.
Yes.
Want to ask you guys, though, in the last couple of minutes we have left, it must have been difficult, though, for you with the original production to know that you knew that you had written something really, really good, and it just wasn't catching. I remember Manny Eisenberg, your original producer, telling me it was the saddest experience he had in the theater because he went to this show that he loved every night, and for some reason it was just not working. Was that the experience that you were having too?
Yeah, it was, the response was so enthusiastic, and the reviews were generally very good, and audiences were just loving it and coming back again and again, but not enough of them. And our producers, God love them, just didn't have the deep pockets of Disney or Garth Drabinsky because it was the same time as Lion King and Ragtime.
Right.
So yeah, it was frustrating that we weren't selling enough. But on the other hand, we had such passionate fans that it felt incredibly gratifying. And when it did close as early, I felt that it was definitely going to have a life because it was playing so well, and that's proven to be true. It was the saddest part for me was that cast we had assembled over 2.5 years of doing readings and everything, and that was sad. That
Although your leads in that, Norm Lewis, Alice Ripley, Emily.
They're doing
They all did
done
very
rather well.
they did
Well.
well. And it's because of that show, I think. That was the show that really established them.
to add on to what Bill just said, it was mind fracking, if you get my drift. And that our audiences were so loving it, and that the zeitgeist at the time wasn't as open as it is now.
Yeah.
I mean, you have gay marriage now that is so many new states every month or so we hear about, and a lot of other things. Also, we were in the middle of two big musicals, which were Ragtime and The Lion King.
That little musical, The Lion King.
And we were off-brand, as far as that goes. And I remember it was a snowy, sleety kind of day, and a bunch of us, I think Alice Ripley was there, I was there, we went to the TKTS in Duffy Square, and we wanted to, were you there too? Or?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. He was probably doing something that would work. But, so we were there trying to convince people to come see our show.
You were buttonholing people
I
online?
admit it, I'm telling you. And there was this one woman and her teenage daughter, and the daughter said, "Mom, I really want to go see that show." "But you're not," she said. "You won't be seeing." "I really want to see it." "But you can't. I won't let you come to that." I said, "Madam," I wrote Dreamgirls. Everybody liked Dreamgirls. I said, "Why don't you come? You can walk out if you don't like it, and I'll give you your tickets back, your money for your tickets back." "No." I said, "We've had it."
And to speak of the girl, also you're coming into the post-Wicked world,
Oh,
where
yeah.
there's this adolescent girls, estranged adolescent tormented girls will love this musical as they love Wicked.
And
I
Frozen.
think you're,
I
I
mean,
think you're
you know,
right. Yeah, and Frozen.
The
yeah.
zeitgeist moment of sisters, or
Yes.
it's big also.
And also, if it hadn't have failed, you would not have gotten to this Bill Condon production.
yeah.
You were meant
And you wouldn't have David
meant to be-
Rockwell's new
And
sets
That's
for it.
right.
And there you are.
Now,
That's right.
speaking of David Rockwell, I know we're run out of time, but I want to call the attention of the world to this beautiful book that
Amazing
David
book,
Rockwell has set out, which just, I don't know how you do all you do. You have the most amazing
Assistants.
design. Yes.
Staff.
But
Long
not
hours.
only is this a gorgeous, cocktail table kind of book, but then it's structured so beautifully that he sets up these design problems with these wonderful pictures, shows how he solves the design problems there at the Rockwell Group. So, I mean, I recommend this highly. Christmas is coming.
Well, I think somebody once said, "Isn't a musical is a series of problems that have to be solved." Is that a fair assessment of this business?
Certainly, once you get out of that rehearsal hall, right, it really becomes that. Absolutely. I think we've got our list down pretty low now, don't we?
Yes, you're there.
Right,
You're
right,
In the
there.
rehearsal hall.
Right, exactly. Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah.
Well, after, what, how many years? 1997? That takes us-
17.
After
years.
17 years, Sideshow is finally getting, I think, the accolades and the justice it deserves on Broadway. It is at the St. James Theater, written by Bill Russell and Henry Krieger, directed by Bill Condon, and designed by David Rockwell. Good luck, gentlemen.
Thank
Thank
very
you.
much. Thanks so much. Thanks for having us.
Pleasure.
No, I will never leave you. I will never leave. I will never go away. We were meant to share each moment. Beside you is where I will stay. That's where I will stay. Evermore will be one nowhere to, one nowhere to. For I will never,
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, plus public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency, and the Theater Development Fund's Technical Accessibility Program, which helps provide closed captioning.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.